Imagine standing in front of thousands of screaming fans every single night, smiling, waving, singing your heart out, while hiding something so deeply personal that not even your closest friends knew the full truth. That is exactly what Sir Cliff Richard did for nearly 3 decades. He stood on those stages, he smiled for those cameras, he signed every autograph with a grin. And behind all of it, he was carrying secrets heavy enough to break most people completely. For 29 years, the man the world called the Peter Pan of pop was living a life that nobody fully understood. And now, finally, the whole truth is starting to come out. So who is the real Cliff Richard? And why did it take so long for the world to find out? Stay with us, because what you are about to hear will completely change the way you see this legend forever. Before we get to the secrets, you need to understand where this man actually came from, because most people do not know the real beginning of his story. The man the world knows as Sir Cliff Richard was not born into fame, and he was not even born in Britain. He came into the world on October 14, 1940, in the city of Lucknow, India, and his name back then was simply Harry Roger Webb. His father Roger worked a steady job for the Indian Railways, and his mother Dorothy kept the family running smoothly. They lived a comfortable life in a place called Maqbara, surrounded by warmth, sunshine, and the kind of peace that makes childhood feel magical. Young Harry grew up alongside his 3 sisters, Joan, Jackie, and Donna, while his grandmother ran a local school nearby. By any measure, it was a good life. But that peace was not going to last. As India fought for its independence, violence and uncertainty started spreading across the country. By 1948, Harry's parents made the painful but necessary decision to pack everything up and leave the only home they had ever known. The entire Webb family boarded a massive ship called the SS Ranchi and spent 3 long weeks crossing the ocean before arriving in Tilbury, Essex. For young Harry, this change was a shock that cut deep. One day, he had a comfortable home, plenty of helpers, and warm sunshine. The next, he was living in a simple house in North Surrey, where everything felt cold, unfamiliar, and completely different. He started school at Stanley Park Juniors and slowly adjusted to his new life. By 1950, the family had settled into a 3-bedroom council house in Cheshunt. Harry did well in school, especially in English literature. But sitting in a classroom was never going to be his future, because music had already found him. His father bought him a guitar when he was just 16 years old, and from that moment on, Harry Webb was absolutely obsessed. The skiffle music craze was sweeping through Britain, and every teenager was going crazy for it. Harry started playing in small school bands, soaking up every note, practicing every chance he got. But there was one problem. The name Harry Webb simply did not sound like a rock star. In 1958, a sharp-thinking entrepreneur named Harry Greatorex suggested the name Cliff because it sounded bold and strong, like something carved out of rock. His friend Ian Samwell added Richard as a tribute to the legendary Little Richard. And just like that, Cliff Richard was born. He formed a band called the Drifters, signed a record deal, and walked into a recording studio ready to change everything. His bosses originally wanted to release a sweet song called Schoolboy Crush. But when they heard the raw energy of a track called Move It, they knew something special had happened. Move It shot up to number 2 in the charts, and overnight, Britain had its answer to Elvis Presley. The boy from Lucknow had become a superstar. As his fame grew and his name spread across every radio in Britain, Cliff changed his band's name to the Shadows after an American group already owned the name the Drifters. But nothing could slow him down. He was in movies, on television, and performing for massive crowds. Then, in 1964, something happened that would shape absolutely everything that came after. Cliff fully embraced his Christian faith. At first, he genuinely thought becoming a believer meant he had to walk away from his pop star life entirely. He even considered becoming a school teacher. But his friends talked him out of it, convincing him that a man could love God and still love music. In 1966, he stood on a stage in front of a massive crowd alongside the famous preacher Billy Graham and told the entire world where his heart truly stood. It was a defining moment that nobody expected. He avoided the wild lifestyle of the 1960s, while his fellow stars were going in completely different directions. He made gospel music. He made movies about his faith. He even gave other major artists, including the Beatles, a piece of his mind about the spiritual paths they were exploring. He became the undisputed king of Christmas music, giving the world songs like Mistletoe and Wine and Saviour's Day that still play in shops across Britain every single December. He came agonizingly close to winning the Eurovision Song Contest in 1968 with his song Congratulations, a performance so good that many people still believe the voting was manipulated against him by a dictator in Spain. Even without the trophy, that song became a global hit that millions of people still sing word for word today. He starred in beloved films like The Young Ones and Summer Holiday. He hosted his own television shows. He became one of the most recognized and loved faces in the entire country. And in 1995, Queen Elizabeth II gave him a knighthood, making him Sir Cliff Richard, the very first rock star in history to receive that honor. He had climbed from a council house in Cheshunt all the way to a title given by the Queen herself. But here's the thing about climbing that high. The view from the top looks very different from what everyone watching from the ground can see. While millions of fans were falling in love with his music and wondering why such a handsome, charming, talented man had never settled down and started a family, Cliff was wrestling with that very question himself. And the answers he gave over the years painted a picture far more complicated than anyone expected. The truth is, Cliff came very close to marriage more than once. In the early 1960s, he met a stunning 19-year-old dancer named Jackie Irving during a summer in Blackpool. He admitted in his own memoirs that he thought about asking her to be his wife. But before he did anything, he went to his manager and asked a question that shocked everyone who later heard it. He asked whether getting married would hurt his career. When his manager told him he could lose a third of his fans, Cliff ended the relationship immediately. When he told this story to television host Piers Morgan years later, Piers was so stunned he called Cliff ruthless. He could not believe that a man would make such a cold, calculated decision about his own heart. Cliff defended himself by saying it simply meant he was not in love quite enough to give everything up. But many people listening were not so sure. Before Jackie, there was a young dancer and singer named Delia Wicks, someone he met in 1960 as his career was exploding at the London Palladium. He genuinely cared about her, but he felt the rising demands of fame left no room for a real relationship. He wrote her a heartbreaking letter ending things so that he could focus entirely on becoming a legend. Then, in the 1980s, came the relationship that would follow him for the rest of his life, whether he liked it or not. He began dating the famous tennis champion and television star Sue Barker after spotting her celebrating a big win in Brighton. He tracked down her number, called her up, invited her to a concert, and swept her off her feet. They spent a memorable summer together during Wimbledon, exchanging phone calls and sweet telegrams, while Sue traveled the world for tennis tournaments. But the constant attention from newspapers and photographers began to wear Sue down. Her father worried openly about the 16-year age gap, warning his daughter it could become a serious problem later in life. Eventually things cooled between them, and Cliff reportedly had a friend call Sue to end the relationship, a move she found deeply hurtful. Years later, after Sue had moved on and married a landscape gardener named Lance Tankard, Cliff began telling interviewers that he had seriously considered proposing to her, but realized he simply did not love her quite enough. Sue was furious. She wrote in her own book that she never considered their time together anywhere near that serious, and she begged him to stop bringing her name up in every interview he gave. She said if she had known she would still be hearing about a few months of dating 40 years later, she never would have gone near him in the first place. Meanwhile, Cliff once admitted that he and many other men had been quietly in love with Grease star Olivia Newton-John during the 1970s. But because she was already engaged to someone else at the time, he felt his chance had already passed him by before it even began. Through all these near misses and secret loves, one question kept following Cliff Richard everywhere he went. For decades, people whispered about whether he might be gay. He always denied it firmly, explaining in the late 1970s that just because a man chooses not to sleep around does not make him homosexual. He said the judgment was painful at times, but he refused to get married simply to stop the public from talking. To him, marriage was sacred, not a tool to manage public opinion. His long-standing living arrangement with former priest John McKellen raised eyebrows and kept the gossip alive for years. But Cliff stood his ground, knowing the truth, and eventually deciding he could not control what strangers chose to believe about his private life. Then came the darkest chapter of all. In 2014, a nightmare arrived that no amount of fame or faith could have prepared him for. A shocking accusation emerged claiming Cliff had been involved with a 15-year-old boy at a Christian rally in Sheffield back in 1985. For more men then came forward with claims of historical sexual offenses dating from the late 1950s to the 1980s. The cases were handed to the Crown Prosecution Service. Cliff was devastated and maintained his complete innocence throughout. The cases were eventually dropped because there was simply not enough evidence to support any of them. He was never arrested. He was never charged with a single crime. But the damage to his spirit had already been done in ways that cut far deeper than any court case. He later opened up about the experience in a documentary called The Accused: National Treasures on Trial. He described lying awake at night, feeling the full weight of the world pressing down on him, consumed by a rage so violent it frightened even him. He said there were moments when he genuinely wondered what he would do if he ever came face to face with the person who had tried to destroy his life. The stress was not just emotional. While living in Portugal during the investigation, Cliff developed painful shingles blisters that crawled across his forehead and came dangerously close to his eyes. His doctor told him plainly that the condition was a direct result of the enormous stress he was under. When he asked the doctor who would ever believe he could go blind, the doctor simply said that stress at that level does terrible things to the human body. Making everything worse was the fact that a search of his home was broadcast live on national television before police had even spoken to him. Cliff felt this was one of the worst invasions of his privacy imaginable. So he took the BBC to court, and he won. Ever since that victory, he has used his platform to fight for a change in the law so that people accused of crimes cannot be named publicly in the media until they are formally charged. He does not want anyone else to ever go through the ordeal he survived. But even as he emerged from that legal nightmare, another secret had already been quietly building inside him. While he was preparing to take his music to Australia and New Zealand on his 2024 tour, bringing joy to thousands of fans who had loved him for their entire lives, a routine insurance medical checkup for the tour revealed something terrifying. Doctors found a tumor. Cliff Richard had been battling early-stage prostate cancer. He revealed this stunning news on Good Morning Britain, explaining that the cancer had been caught before it could spread to his bones or travel further through his body. He kept the struggle completely private, performing on stage, smiling for cameras, and carrying this secret alone for a long time before finally speaking out. He sat down for a deeply moving conversation with former television presenter Dermot Murnaghan, who was facing his own stage for cancer battle. And the two men spoke with raw, unguarded honesty about fear, mortality, and the desperate importance of catching these things early. Cliff has since become one of the loudest voices calling for a national prostate cancer screening program, urging the government to act and begging men everywhere to stop thinking of themselves as invincible. He has been joined in this mission by King Charles, who has also faced his own cancer battle and reached a major milestone in his treatment. The sight of the King of England and the King of Pop standing together to say that early diagnosis saves lives is one of the most powerful things to come out of either man's story. When asked whether he would team up with King Charles for a major charity campaign around cancer testing, Cliff did not hesitate for even a second. He said that if the King was listening, he was ready and available. And through all of this, through the accusations and the health scares and the secret romances and the decades of gossip, one truth has remained constant. Cliff Richard has never stopped giving. He tithes 10% of everything he earns to charity, something he has done for over 40 years. He has given millions to organizations fighting poverty in Uganda and Brazil. He has poured his heart into Alzheimer's Research UK after watching his own mother slowly lose herself to the disease. He started a tennis foundation that has helped over 200,000 children get active in schools across Britain. He flew across the world with his own eyes to see the charitable work being done with his money, not just writing checks from a distance. This is the man behind the secrets. This is the real Cliff Richard. Not just a pop star. Not just a bachelor who never married. Not just a man who survived false accusations and a cancer diagnosis while the world watched. He is someone who gave everything he had, both publicly on stage and quietly behind the scenes, for the people he cared about most. The double life he lived for 29 years was never really about darkness or scandal. It was about a man protecting his peace while finding ways to give his light to everyone else. And now that the truth has finally come to light, it turns out that Sir Cliff Richard's biggest secret was just how much of himself he was silently giving away all along.